once you actually get into the movement and you get to meet all these people like I have and like everyone else has, there's not an issue, but it's actually explaining it to people and being like, well, when you get into it, you know, the way you do it is you go to a church and you do this, you know, stereotypical worship. And I think there's a lot of focus on the Christocentric values of it all. And it's all very, you know, churchy for something that's actually quite secular. When I go to stuff like the GA, there are a lot of young adults, young people there who I get on with really, really well. It's just a shame that we don't get it out there in a way that's different from the whole, you know, come to our church group, come to Sunday school. And I wish there was more of a way of kind of introducing people to it without being like, well, come join our religion, and people just immediately being turned off to it because of this image that they've got in their head, which is reinforced as soon as they turn up at this church and everyone's kind of going, oh, welcome to our church, here's the hymn book, let's do the Lord's Prayer.
Is there a solution?
I think if there were a wider advertising of something along the lines of what we have done at Hucklow or the GA or Flag, I mean, Flag would probably be ideal because it's, you know, something separate. It's not something that's necessarily, you know, owned by a church. It isn't a church, but it is linked to Unitarianism. You know, it's not just handing out a brochure with the chalice on the front and being like, are you interested in religion? Come and meet some other religious kids. And I think it's more putting it to that level that's not so much focused on this religious side, which we're not. It's not to diss it as a religion. It's not to take away from it. It's to say that it's more of a faith and a community and a society and a family than many other mainstream religions are. And I think that's where we've got the selling point, that we can present it to young people and make it attractive to them, but we're not utilising it in the way that we could be.
So for those that haven't the experience of going to the events that you're talking about, what sort of activities are there that you think really work and hit the button and do it for you?
It's not so much individual activities, it's more connecting as a group. You know, you turn up there, especially at your first ones, and you don't really know anyone, and you feel kind of awkward, and then it's pretty much after a few hours, you've gelled as a group and you realise where you are, and you're all equals, but you've got this kind of group dynamic going on. And I think it's really nice to see every time it does happen, because when you're changing on stuff like juniors into seniors, you'll always turn up, whether it's your 7th youth event, your first one, and it'll always be a little bit different. And then the group kind of absorbs new members. It's got people moving up, it's got people moving out, but it always, that dynamic's still there, just with different people.
What you're describing is the atmosphere, the emotion, the real magic that occurs at those youth events, and that really the adults don't ever see, because that's not tends to be emulated anywhere else that I've seen in the movement.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you there, because I think there is a disconnection between the people who are advertising it and putting out all these brochures and posters and the people who are actually there experiencing it. And I think if, say, we put them together and we got a group where the people who've experienced it meet up with the people who are responsible for these adverts, brochures, whatever, and then we come up with a new way of doing it or a new angle to take.
And what you're implying to me is that you think they should concentrate on more national events rather than actual activities at a local level in congregations.
I think that's almost where we're making the biggest mistake. We're getting people to get into the church first, make them a member there, and then send them out to these national events. And it's very, very, very hard to sell something which essentially sounds like a Sunday school for adults, when what you could do is advertise something where it's a large group of people, but from all over the country, and you then go from there and you help them find their local congregations or the nearest one to them, and then they can address that as an option. But they don't necessarily need to go, they might go to a different one. There might be a one that caters for them better, because as you say, it kind of plummets off and we lose a lot of members when there's nothing really to cater for them, and it's just kind of, well, that's all over now you've turned 18, there's nothing for you now, just go back to church. And for a lot of us it was a way to escape that ritual, that weekly ritual of Sundays and hymns, and really find what was our congregation.
How can the old internet help?
I think social media is a really good tool for a lot of groups, societies, movements, whatever. And I think for something that's quite modern in its concepts and its beliefs, Unitarianism doesn't use it anywhere near as much as it could. And I mean, with you guys at UK Unitarian TV, I see you guys pop up every once in a while, and you actually use social media as a way of getting out there, and people can share your videos and share your posts, and so many organisations do the same thing. But I think Unitarianism seems to have not managed to get that far. They might have made a page, and they might every once in a while post, and local congregations, I think my local church makes a post every once in a while, but I think actually utilising it and posting on it daily would be invaluable to us as a faith if we want to attract new people, especially younger people. Because if you go, well, there's this church and I don't really know much about it, and I try to find them on Facebook but they're not there, I think it might put some people off, because it's kind of, well, are they stuck in the dark ages? Are we going to have to use candlelight?
If it's not online, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, pretty much.
Like, I'm not a part of a congregation anywhere, so as far as how churches can kind of bring more young people in, I don't really think I could talk about that, because they haven't been able to keep me, and I would still consider myself like an active Unitarian. But I'd keep part of it by talking to other Unitarians and reading things on the Facebook page, and, you know, getting involved with things like GA and Booyan. But I don't really know how to spread that out, because this is a problem that we've had for years. It's nothing new. But if I find that, you know, if people get in really early, then they're more likely to stay, which I know is something that we've already discussed, as I said. I'm not entirely sure how we could bring other people into that who've never heard of it before, because of the way that I am active, if you know what I mean. Because what I'm suggesting is that, you know, I probably only go to one event a year, which is GA, and it's an incredibly intimidating space to come into if you've never been to anything Unitarian before, to be like, pay this money, come to this place where there's loads and loads of Unitarians who come from all over. That can be quite intimidating. I think if young people are going to get more involved, it's probably going to be more on an intimate basis.
What would have to be different about a Sunday morning service experience to make you want to go?
I think I would go to do church on a Sunday if it were later on in the day, because Sunday mornings are difficult for students, I'd say, as a general rule. And if it wasn't the normal hymn sandwich, like, I'm just kind of bored. It's not that I don't enjoy those kind of services, it's just that they're very boring to have on a weekly basis, you know, where you go and you get the three hymns and the sermon and all that jazz. I want a bit more conversation when I go on a Sunday. I think that's what I'd kind of would make me come back the next week if there was a topic that was kind of broached by the minister, and then there was like open discussion had by the congregation during the service. And yeah, hymns are great, but you know, they can be really pressurizing as well, because a lot of even the newer songs are to really old tunes, and if you've not been to church before, you might not know those tunes. So things like musical interludes and stuff could be like an alternative. It's like, as I say, we've been talking about ways in which to change church services to make them more accessible to young people for years and years and years. And every time any of us ever talk about it, we always say, shake it up, make it different, make it more like modern, kind of change the old ways. And every time they're like, well, yeah, this is a really good idea. Let's do it one Sunday, you know, every month. But the rest of the time, we're going to do what we want. So, yeah. The problem is that what would get me out of bed is if I had a community that I was connected to. Like, what I go to GA for is discussions that we have with friends. Like, that's a real kind of pull for me, is seeing people that I really like to talk to. You know, going and seeing those people on an annual basis is fun, but if I had an opportunity to speak to like-minded people on a weekly basis, that'd be really attractive to me.
We're not getting many young adults into churches. Why?
I think that it's because we are not offering something that appeals to them. In a world of today where we have a lot of choice and it's not necessarily tradition that people would go to church, then people have to choose of their own volition and have to have something that's bringing them in. That's now also the case for people of retirement age, for many of them. However, we still do get a lot of people coming in at retirement age, and I don't think that's any coincidence. I think it's because we offer things that speak to that demographic, and we do not offer things that speak to the young adult demographic.
So what would appeal to them?
Personally, I think that it is the worship style. I've done different worship styles with young adults, both who were already Unitarian or in a church service where they are visiting. And if it's more interactive and uses more of your senses than just listening and watching, it's more appealing. And I've heard positive feedback when it comes to that. A lot of the young adults, I think, are looking for ritual, which is something that we tend to have dropped from our services for reasons of historical hurt, I think, for most people, and the fear of empty ritual. But that is what a lot of people are crying out for. And if you look at the churches that are thriving for the young demographic in other denominations, they are the progressive Christian, rock band, lots of energy. Now, I do not think that if we get a rock band, that is going to help us. I don't think that's our target audience. But the idea that you stand up and that you get, you're participating in the worship, they have a lot of call and response. It's that kind of ritual and being included, so you don't just feel like you're sat watching a lecture, which most young people do every day anyway, and they don't want to do it on a Sunday.
So how do we dumb down like this and keep our existing congregation?
Well, that is one of the misconceptions we need to change. I don't think it would be dumbing down at all. I think that actually one of the reasons why we're not already doing it is because it's difficult. Because you have to think of the message that you want to give across and not just talk it at people. You have to think of how you want to let people know that whatever, like that peace comes from within? How do you want to let people know that peace comes from within without just getting up there and giving them a bunch of quotes about how other people have said that peace comes from within? You then have to think of, what can we physically do to let them feel that? What can we do to let them express that? What can we do to let them think internally about what that means in their life during the service? Now, if you do this well, it shouldn't change the demographics already in the congregations. What I've recently learned is that the reason why people are often worried about change is because they're worried about what they will lose. And realistically, all you have to do is encourage the current population that they're not going to lose anything, they're only going to gain. They will still have a sermon, they will still have a message, they just may have to express themselves slightly differently. And on the other part of that is what their mission is of their congregation. Is their mission just to keep the congregation and the people who are in it happy right now? Because if that's what it is, they can stay how they are and they will close in a few years. And if it is not, if it is to do more than just serve the people who are sat in the pews, then they have to look at being uncomfortable with some of the aspects. I like to look at it as, who are you serving? If you are just serving yourselves, then that's perfectly valid, but you're not going to grow and you're not going to continue. I hope to think that most of our congregations do see themselves as serving other people and not just themselves.
Is this what, in this country, bearing in mind you're over there in Canada at the moment, is this what we call intergenerational services?
Yes, probably. Although I've been to some intergenerational services that I would not consider following this model. I prefer to call them multi-sensory worship because it's not just about intergenerational. Seems to be, people think, well, if you give them a long story from a storybook, then that's okay, because it's for the children. And so I like to say multi-sensory worship because when you look through an order of service, I do a children's order of service for when I do multi-sensories, and for each item on the order of service there is like a symbol of an eye, an ear, a hand, a body, a singing or a talking. And so the children know what they're going to do even if they can't read.
Most successful would definitely be these kind of new age evangelical churches that you've seen a lot of. Three kind of facets, I'd argue, of the experience they offer. There's the kind of the solid certainty of the theology that they offer, which is like Unitarians' kind of greatest asset, I'd argue, is also its greatest weakness. In terms of the greatest asset we have theologically and ideologically, it's basically, as long as it sits right with your conscience and as long as you know you can build your own, you can work your own out based on your own perspective and your own outlook and your own conscience, it's basically you're free to explore the grey as you see fit, and you'll be supported within that with other members of your kind of faith circuits. However, nonetheless, it is grey. When you go home to bed, it is grey. You know, when you wake up in the morning, it is grey, and you have to take an active search for that and to continue to do that. So ideologically, a lot of the new age evangelical churches we're seeing are the complete opposite of that. It's very certain. It's here is salvation, here is a faith system, here is a theology, and as long as you find this palatable and can subscribe to it, then you are saved, so to speak. And there is I think, a lot of reassurance and comfort within that. The second aspect is the worship itself. So again, a lot of kind of Unitarian churches have this problem. We're stuck in this kind of transfer phase between this very old, almost Church of England kind of worship format, whereby it's a number of hymns and there's readings, etc., etc. Whereas these places, if you get an opportunity, I'd actually advocate going, because it's incredibly interesting how they do it. So what will happen is you start and you get pumped up listening to this rock-styled band with various songs about Jesus and his merits. After that, there tends to be a kind of worship, kind of sermon style, but it's It's very cool, it's very sleek, there's no pulpit, it's a guy with a microphone talking about, you know, one of the kids, he's down with the kids, there's no suits, no stuffiness, none of that. So there's kind of like this idea of this very kind of modern, novel, kind of unchurch-like church experience that you get from these kind of new places. And then the third, and the final thing that these guys are doing really well is they are marketed like real modern companies. Their branding's phenomenal. The literature that they give out following service is phenomenal. Their Facebook presence is phenomenal. Their websites are phenomenal. Everything about it is really, really, really quite cool, I would argue. And I think the reason why a lot of these places are able to conduct themselves like this is because they are so new. Because they're basically building something from the ground up, something new. And I think part of the problem that we have is that we have this legacy. So there's this kind of this vying and this pulling to and fro of basically the old school who want the movement to continue but are quite fixed in their ideas about what they want to continue, and this adaptation and this change in order to survive. But this isn't anything new. And it's not something that we're alone in. You know, my parents have exactly the same thing with their walking club, where membership's dropping down low at the moment, and there's this very kind of old school stalwart who are like, we must keep it this way, blah 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 blah. But then on the other hand, there is this kind of vying to survive. So it's a problem I think that a lot of places have. And then there's also, which is quite cool and trendy and kind of popular, so much so that Penguin did a mocking, I don't know if you saw this Christmas, they released that humorous rage of Penguin's how-to guides, and always a mindfulness one, of course. I think mindfulness appeals to people for the opposite reasons that this new kind of evangelical theology does, because mindfulness is again, at its core, is basically this kind of personal, almost self-satisfied idea that this is what I'm doing and this is that. I think it's popular because it doesn't come with the ideological tenets. So you can come along and you can practice at groups, various different bits of meditation. You can go on Facebook, you can read various different things, and it's quite a casual faith. It's quite a casual ideology.
Do we change the Sunday service?
What we should be maybe focusing more on is less people sat in pews on a Sunday, but actually whether we're offering people a spiritual home. And what I mean by that is basically, so Altrincham does a number of additional kind of spiritual things beyond the Sunday service. So we've got basically Danny Crosby, the Reverend, once a month on a Thursday, he has 11 the questions, which explores a number of kind of spiritual / kind of theological themes in a discussion-based format where people kind of sit around and engage with this theme, engage with a bit of literature. There might be a period of quiet time meditation together. And these are quite well attended. You know, you can see maybe between 10 and 15 people at these events, of which maybe 2 might actually regularly attend on Sunday. So that event, if you look at it kind of numerically and in terms of the value it's giving people, is a success. The fact that people do not come on a Sunday doesn't mean that, you know, we as a congregation have been unsuccessful. We have another similar group, which Mark Hutchinson, who is trying to become a minister at the moment, is running, and that's a similar one. It's called Touching the Spirit. So it begins, and people engage with, like, a number of theme cards are given, and they engage with that theme, and then there's a period of meditation, and then there's a period of discussing various different readings, and it's very fluid. It's not rigid. It's not structured. We've got this massive spectrum of theology that we can engage with as we see fit. We've got the ability for people to engage with that collectively. So rather than focusing on the Sunday service, which is by its nature has to be quite a rigid affair, quite structured in order for people to be able to do it regularly, then focus more on how basically individual little kind of sessions can be held on a kind of weekly or a monthly basis, which enable people to gain kind of spiritual fulfillment, but in a kind of way that's less formal than Sunday worship.